Good morning, members, and welcome to this meeting of the Licensing Committee on the 27th of June 2023. Item 1 on the agenda, apologies. Do we have any apologies?
Thank you, Chairman. We have no apologies today and there are no substitute members. Can I just do the housekeeping notice?
Thank you.
So please note this meeting is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the website for a minimum of 6 months. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point along Bradley Road under the flyover. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum, including mobile phones and other devices to be turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 3 on this morning's agenda, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations they wish to announce? No, thank you, members. Confirmation of minutes. To confirm the following sets of minutes as an accurate record of for the chair to sign, that is the Licensing Committee of the 24th of May 2023, Licensing Subcommittees 28th of April and the 31st of May. Are members happy that I sign those as a true and correct record?
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you. Item 5, public issues. There are no public statements or questions required this morning. Moving on then to item 6, consideration of amendments to the BCP taxi and private hire vehicle policy. The purpose of this report is to consider recommended amendments to the current BCP Council taxi and private hire vehicle policy 2021, relating to the age of new or replacement vehicles at first licence and the maximum age of licensed vehicles. Could I ask the officer to introduce the item, please? Sophie?
Thank you, Chair. My name is Sophie Sajic and I'm the Head of Safer Communities. I'm standing in for Nananka Randall this morning. I also have Trudy Barlow and Michelle Fletcher on my left, who are our licensing officers that specialise in taxi policy. So this report details proposed changes to the vehicle policy of 2021. It follows on from Licensing Committee on the 9th of March 2023, where considerations were made, but we needed to have further discussions with the trade. So that was led by Trudy to my left. Following that discussion that happened on the 27th of April, there were recommended amendments to the policy to support the purchase of new vehicles. As I'm sure that you'll be aware, the purchase of second-hand vehicles the price of those has gone up in recent years, and also we needed to ensure that the policy itself was similarly in line to other neighbouring authorities. So there are approximately 300 vehicles that need to be changed by the end of the year in order to comply with Euro 6 emission standards, and this was something that was led by the trade in order to make vehicles more accessible. So the recommendation within the report is to remove the age restriction on wheelchair accessible vehicles in order to encourage the purchase and licence of such vehicles to support passengers in wheelchairs. We currently have 60 of those vehicles in the conurbation. The policy itself within the report, the proposed amendments do not constitute a significant change to policy, although obviously there has been consultation with the trade themselves. The proposals will have a positive financial impact on the taxi trade. There is no procedural impact and there will be no adverse impact on the community. This has been through an equalities impact panel and it has been deemed that it's a positive impact to equalities as well by making wheelchair accessible vehicles easier to obtain. So the current policy, paragraph 7.5 states that the age and emission standards for all vehicles at the first licence must be no more than 3.5 years old from the date of first registration and also must meet Euro 6 emission standards or higher. Paragraph 7.6 states that wheelchair accessible vehicles must be no more than 4.5 years old from the date of first registration, have no more than 50,000 miles on the clock and must meet Euro 6 emission standards or higher. The taxi trade confirmed that licence holders are potentially looking at moving outside of the BCP area into other local authority areas as the requirements for vehicles within our policies are more restrictive. So that was one of the key drivers in making this change. The proposed amendments are as follows. To amend paragraph 7.5 to read that all vehicles must be no more than 5 years of age from the first registration with less than 60,000 miles on the clock and still meeting Euro 6 emission standards or higher. Paragraph 7.6, all wheelchair accessible vehicles must have no more than 100,000 miles on the clock and must meet Euro 6 emission standards or higher. And to delete paragraph 11.1, which states, from the date of this policy, no licence will be issued for the renewal of any vehicle aged 15 years or older from the date of first registration. So this policy looks to ensure that the safety of vehicles is still maintained, but the availability of vehicles, especially wheelchair accessible vehicles, is higher to the fleet in order to encourage wheelchair accessible vehicles. That's the end of the report, and we'll open up to any questions. Obviously, I've got the officers here to support the detail as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Do members have any questions for the officers, please? Adrian.
Yeah, do we know sort of the average mileage lifespan of these cars when they're getting towards that sort of 15-year-old? I mean, how many miles a year are these vehicles doing?
It really does vary. I mean, we've had one that's just done 600,000. Yes, but obviously, as they're tested twice yearly, the standard is maintained. So if they look after their vehicle, then it's fine. But obviously there are some vehicles that could have done 100,000 and be in terrible condition. So it's a matter of the testing regime on top of the mileage, and we're trying to encourage vehicles not to be brought onto the fleet that are already sort of, should we say, well used.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Another question?
When are they also, when they're obviously they're doing servicing on the cars, does that include sort of replacing interiors and stuff like that?
The interior is looked at, yes, on the, there are 2 tests a year, one at the depots, the council depots at Southcote Road and Hatchpond Road, and the other is a standard MOT. So the MOT standard obviously just looks at the mechanical, like you're on my car. The one at the depots does look in more depth at the standard of the interior as well, yes.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further questions? Councillor Farquhar.
Yes, indeed, Chair. Can we sort of drill into these 300 odd cars that are coming up to be replaced by the end of this year, I think I heard, and what was the nature of why these vehicles are being replaced, please? And what percentage of the fleet is that 300 vehicles?
Thank you for your question.
When it last came to the committee, which was in March, it was approximately a third of the fleet. I haven't an up-to-date figure for you, but it will probably be just a little bit less than a third now. Sorry, what was the second question, Councillor?
If we could drill into the nature of why these 300 odd vehicles are being replaced, is it because they're end of life, because there's mileage, is it because they've got mechanical faults, is it because the interiors are poor? Why are 300 vehicles coming off the fleet, or approximately a third of the fleet?
It is to meet the council policy of the Euro 6 standard.
If I may, Chair, I'm just looking through the report. I'm really pleased that we're having a frontline lead as regards to Euro 6 compared to the other councils that's there, and I'm glad that's taken effect. I'm also glad that the fleet managers, even though some vehicles will move outside of the area because there's less restriction, I think we need to set the bar really high, and I'm really pleased that this is coming to effect. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar. Are there any further questions? Councillor Hilliard.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, on that point about registering vehicles in cross-border in either New Forest or Dorset. So how does that work in practicality? Can they poach a BCP registered vehicles business, or are there guidelines on that's your patch, this is our patch? Thank you.
This is a very complicated area. Obviously, the legislation goes back, you know, the most recent legislation is 50 years old. So, and the most, you know, the Hackney carriage legislation is 150 plus years old. In regard to other areas, what happens now is due to the legislation, some of our large operators have actually got offices registered in the neighbouring areas. So providing they have cars in the neighbouring areas, the legislation allows them to pass the bookings from one to the other. and it's not something that is within our control, unfortunately. Yeah, and it's been happening already that they go to the other authority who have more relaxed conditions, should we say, and then the company has a office in BCP, but also has an office in the neighbouring authority. Therefore, the legislation allows them to swap. You know, they can sort of share it all out, so to speak.
So obviously there's a careful balance that we want to protect our environment, and that's why we've got this emissions policy. But similarly, we want to protect the businesses that, yeah, they can go elsewhere. So it's that balance. And so you're saying that the taxi companies you've been speaking to are happy with that balance of the 5 years and the 100,000 miles, and indications are that they won't be going cross-border to register. Thanks.
I can't honestly speak for what they wish to do. Obviously, we've asking to increase the age because the current climate is, if anybody's tried to buy a second-hand vehicle in the last couple of years, it's gone up quite considerable. And obviously the investment therefore goes up accordingly. And if they can go somewhere else, some of them may choose to do that depending on their operational, you know, how they operate themselves.
Yeah, so I think for me, is it far enough? Is 3.5 years, 5 years, and the mileage restrictions, is that enough to protect our emissions here? Because if we need to raise it, because cars coming in from New Forest and Dorset have no restrictions, surely it's better to raise if it's appropriate.
I think it's a matter of we're trying to maintain a certain standard. You know, obviously, the makeup of our town is, you know, Bournemouth, Christchurch, Poole is a lot more perhaps than out in the countryside of Dorset or even the New Forest. Although I do understand New Forest are currently reviewing their policy at this moment. We've heard that in the last couple of weeks. They've inquired of us what our standards are. So it is a difficult one, but we're just trying to find a balance.
Okay, that's useful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any further questions for officers? Councillor Farquhar.
Perhaps for newer members, it would be helpful, Chair. Are vehicles which are hackney carriages which are licensed in another authority able to rank on our ranks?
No,
Really?
no.
No. Thank you for that. Right, if there are no further questions, I would like to just remind members of the proposed amendments as set out in paras 20, 21 and 22, and open the item up for debate. Councillor Chapman-Law.
Yeah, I don't have too many problems with the first one, with 7.5. You know, that's sort of, it's just giving more choice. 7.6, I mean, like the 100,000 miles, I mean, as you say, it seems like they're doing lots of miles anyway. And hopefully, although I am a little bit concerned about engine wear and, you know, okay, yes, there were Euro 6 in 2015, but are they Euro 6? Are they actually meeting the Euro 6 compliance? Because obviously the MOT test is relatively basic in terms of emissions, I believe. The 15-year thing on 11.1, I don't really see what the point of that is, because they have to be Euro 6 anyway, and which limits them to 2015, I believe. That was when it was brought in. I don't think any cars were previous to 2015 were Euro 6, as far as I've been able to find out. Which means that in 2030, we could still be using lots and lots of diesels on our roads and beyond, when, you know, climate crisis, climate emergency says that we really should be pushing towards at least hybrids and preferably full electrics in the future. I mean, obviously, you know, it's a growing part at the moment, which I believe the taxi companies aren't particularly keen on. But yeah, I mean, it's, yeah. So sum up, 10.5 I'm reasonably happy with. 10.6 less happy with high mileage cars, which may not be meeting standards, and 11.1 I'm not happy with at all.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman-Law. Any further debate?
Can I just clarify? I think the proposal is to remove 11.1 from the
Yes,
policy.
because by default, as you've just mentioned, it becomes obsolete.
Okay, I've misunderstood what that
Yeah.
meant. So
At the moment, obviously, if the Euro 6 policy wasn't coming in, then vehicles, when they reach 15 years, have to be replaced. So obviously, by default, so that for the last 3 years has been the situation. So once they've come to 15, but by default with this policy, the 15 years becomes obsolete, as you've just pointed out, because September 2015 is the natural cut-off. That's why it's asking to be removed at the same time.
I'm not sure. Are you saying, yeah, no, can you just run that past me again? Sorry.
At the beginning of the year, somebody could have a vehicle, so in January just gone, somebody could have had a vehicle that was 15 years. We would not renew it because it's 15 years old. If it was 14 years old, we would still renew it until this new policy comes in. So now, once the new policy comes in for the Euro 6, regardless of where the age limits are, by default, that and it's just basically just tidying up that extra condition, which is no longer valid after the policy, Euro 6 policy comes into it.
Because all vehicles must be Euro 6.
Yes. So it'll be 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, and obviously the policy is due to be reviewed again in 2025. So.
Okay, so I was assuming that, yeah, I hadn't thought that maybe we'd be looking at it again in future. So yeah, I didn't want to get to the point of 2030 of having.
No, the policy will be reviewed probably a couple of times before then. So.
Thank you. So just to remind members then that item para 22 states to delete paragraph 11.1, which states from the date of this policy, no licence will be issued for the renewal for any vehicle aged 15 years or older from the date of first registration. So I hope members are happy with that statement. Any further debate, please?
Yes, just a clarification really for Councillor Chapman-Law. I've just Googled emissions testing for MOTs, and the test is quite stringent. Either they pass it or they don't. So it's, if it's going to be tested, which it'll have to, then it's going to be tested. And I think that based on this, it's one of the key tests that vehicles go under now, particularly for what we're looking at now. So I'm happy that the MOT emissions testing is quite stringent and would be sufficient for our purposes.
Councillor Farquhar.
I think that's a very valid point there, Chair, and it might be useful for the officers to remind us how often the vehicles on fleet, whether private or hackney, are actually tested for emissions. What concerns me a little, because I know we're going to review this again for the policy, but just reading through the how we compare to other local authorities, Southampton City Council have something which they call CVRAS, Clean Vehicle Retrofit Accreditation Scheme. Would an officer be able to expand on that, particularly from the concerns which are raised that vehicles may wish to get round the emission issues by actually changing their fuel type, or because reading this, it looks at the face of it, if they change to LPG, then they're exempt from any emission standards. I've got a real concern for LPG because the amount of methane which has been produced in Southampton from the cruise ships, to my understanding, is because they've switched from diesel to liquid petroleum, and therefore when they are not running what they call shore to ship power and they're running their own engines, they're actually increasing by 35-fold in the last 2 years the amount of methane which has been produced. So if it's within the ability of the officers to answer, the two questions is how often do our vehicles get checked for emissions? And the second one, is this CVRAS, is this a way round emission standards? As Councillor Dower said, it's either a pass or a fail. And if a vehicle fails on emission standards, is this perhaps a loophole which a vehicle could actually switch fuel types to get round the emissions?
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar.
Not a technical expert on emissions, I'm afraid. When I looked up this CVRS, it's more to do with the larger vehicles. I'm not quite sure why it's in Southampton's policy, but it's more to do with, like, you know, buses, you know, more commercial type vehicles, as far as I could see. When I inquired about of our technicians at one of the depots as to what they could do to make an amendment to it, they weren't under the impression that there is actually anything that's available to a standard saloon vehicle at the time. I mean, that's not to say things change overnight, but I'm not aware of anything. So I'm saying I'm not an emissions expert, but I can't. So if you wanted a specific answer, I'd have to try and get some further information from somebody that knows about these things more. In regard to the vehicle testing, our vehicles, as I said earlier, are tested twice a year. Once at one of the council's depots, which is an MOT test plus, as we call it, because obviously it includes a lot more, you know, the livery, the standard inside, as another councillor has asked, and then a standard MOT 6 months after, and it's very strict, 6 months, 6 months, 6 months. So they are tested on a 6-monthly basis. Thank you.
Sophie, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so just looking at the CBRAS website, it does also say that there is not the opportunity to retrofit a pre-Euro 6, pre-Euro 4 petrol car or a pre-Euro 6 diesel car. The technology hasn't been developed at this point because there's not enough of a business case to justify it. So it won't come into consideration with those vehicles.
Thank you for that. Councillor Dower.
Yeah, with regards to retrofitting, this is just my sort of logical thoughts about this. For someone to retrofit the car, that's going to cost a bit of dosh, and to me, it wouldn't make financial sense for someone to do that. They would probably just go out and either get it fixed or buy a new car. So that's my thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair.
Sorry, George. Yes, thank you, Chair. When I looked at the, I always think that you need to sort of be fairly consistent with the neighbouring authorities. But when I looked at the really wide differences, I thought that was really quite surprising. But neither Dorset nor the New Forest councils, which are totally next neighbours, they've got no emission standard conditional age of first licence, and you sort of think that's really quite surprising. And I have to say, my first thoughts, if I'm going to travel anywhere by taxi, is for the safety and the roadworthiness of the vehicles. And I personally wouldn't be happy unless the age of a vehicle at first licence was a condition. And I think also, as you said previously, the we have to think about the environmental impact. So I am happy to support the amendments because I think that they will help with the will help me with the safety, and I think it's a balance as well that we're striking for members of the trade, so that they don't go into Dorset, and I think it's the right balance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar, please.
Well, following on from Councillor Moore's sort of consideration, and that's quite right that our paying public using these vehicles, which, as I stated before, they are very much a reflection of the town, the three towns, and the drivers need to be ambassadors for Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. The question which niggles with me is, do we really want to have 15-year-old vehicles being ambassadorial vehicles to be driving our visitors and residents around within the conurbation? Perhaps my question to the officer then would be, what percentage of the fleet are actually over 15 years old at the moment, and which number of those third, which are going to be replaced by the end of the year, will that knock that subject down? Or perhaps, if it was to hand, what the pie chart is for the age 5 years and under, 5 to 10, 10 to 15 and above might be useful for our deliberation.
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar. Are we able to provide an answer for that?
As the current policy doesn't allow anything over 15 years, there are no vehicles over 15 years. There are vehicles under 15 years. I can't give you a breakdown of their age, but with the Euro 6, then as I say, that would make the maximum vehicle age 8. Obviously, the reason for the wheelchair accessible more relaxed approach is because we are trying to encourage people. It's a bigger investment to get a wheelchair accessible car, and we're trying to encourage them because we don't have enough on our fleet. So we're still maintaining the Euro 6 standard, but we're trying to, if somebody's sort of stuck between wanting a saloon and a wheelchair accessible, just to encourage them that if that might be something they would consider, hence why it's perhaps a little bit more than we would normally like. But as I said, with the current second-hand market as it is, it's we've got to have that flexibility, and we felt that was the best way. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Filer, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to move that we agree the amendments, paragraph 7.5 and 7.6 as set out, and to delete paragraph 11.1. And on reading the report, paragraph 6 of the report, not of the document, it says the proposed amendments will not constitute a significant change to the policy. The proposals will have a positive financial impact on the taxi trade, and there will be no procedural impact and have no adverse impact on the community, and will provide a positive impact by ensuring the continued provision of locally licensed vehicles for our residents and visitors. And I think that much as we consider, of course, safety is paramount, we've also got a trade to consider, and we really rely on those people who are driving our taxis, and so do many of our visitors and many of our residents as well, increasingly. And so I don't think we want to be too stringent at this stage. It's something we can revisit in the future, but we are more stringent than quite a number of our neighbours. And to my mind, this is a very sensible amendment. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Filer. Do we have a seconder for? We do indeed. Right, if there's no further debate, I will put it to the floor that the proposed amendments are as set out in 20 and 21 on the report, and that para 22 is deleted from the recommendation. Are all members happy to vote on that? I'll vote as well. Thank you. Thank you, members. Moving on then to item 7, to consider the latest Hackney Carriage Unmet Needs Survey. Currently, there is a restriction on the number of Hackney Carriage vehicles licences issued within the Bournemouth and Poole Hackney Carriage zones. There is no restriction on the number of Hackney Carriage licences issued in the Christchurch Hackney Carriage zone. The current BCP Council Taxi Hackney Carriage Vehicle Policy 2021 specifies that any new Hackney Carriage vehicle will only be issued to a suitable wheelchair accessible vehicle. In order to maintain a restriction on the quantity of Hackney Carriage vehicle licences issued, the local authority must be able to demonstrate there is no unmet need, which would require additional licences to be issued. Current good practice requires local authorities to undertake an unmet needs survey every 3 years. Can I ask Sophie to introduce the item, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this report details the unmet needs survey of 2023. The previous unmet needs survey took place in 2020, and it is good practice for local authority to undertake this survey every 3 years. So this survey has been undertaken as in previous years. This has already been undertaken once since the merger and the formation of BCP Council. This does link quite considerably to the previous policy changes, as we've just discussed, around making wheelchair accessible vehicles more freely available. So having looked at this unmet needs survey, the overarching element is that there is no considered unmet need at this particular time. There are 60 wheelchair accessible vehicles within the fleet. However, obviously the policy amendments that have just been agreed will look to support the continued provision of wheelchair accessible vehicles within the fleet. So there are 15 licenses that are open on a yearly basis for those vehicles, for those hackney carriages, and those vehicles must be wheelchair accessible under the policy. So as we've heard previously about the age of the vehicles, but also the vehicles themselves are quite specific in their dimensions, which means that the age of the vehicle is not going to be significant in order to make sure that the vehicles are fully wheelchair accessible. So the overarching recommendation within the report is that we continue as we are, continue to release 15 new hackney carriage licenses on an annual basis, and obviously this is the recommendation at the moment. The policy itself is due up for renewal again in 2025, as we've just discussed. And at present, there is no unmet need in order for us to make a more stringent amount of numbers or increase the numbers. So that's the end of the report.
Thank you. Don't want to put you on the spot, Sophie, but can I just confirm that the government's take on this is that if the unmet needs survey is not undertaken, there is a bias towards not restricting the number of licenses that are issued, i.e. in Christchurch, we never had a restriction on numbers.
Yeah, that's correct. The OFT years ago did a survey on it, and while they didn't categorically state that you cannot have restricted numbers, so it can be still restricted. That imposition of this unmet needs survey is what you need to maintain that status, so to speak. So yes, if you don't have any restriction, you don't need an unmet needs survey.
Thank you very much for that. I hope that sort of helped members in their deliberations. Are there any questions for the officers at all? Councillor Dower.
Yes, sorry. I think I've sort of misunderstood this one, so I just want to clarify. So we're just talking about the WAVs here, are we? So when are we looking at the other hackney carriages? Because is there an unmet needs survey there, or is that this included in this? Sorry, bit of a
the unmet needs survey is for all hackney carriages, so it's for all the hackney carriages in Bournemouth have a limit, and all the hackney carriages in Poole have a limit, and this is to maintain that limit, because obviously to do away with the restriction would be considered quite a large policy change, which is due to be reviewed in 2025 anyway. But this is what we have to do to keep the status quo as it currently is, and it is a requirement. So
that helps. Councillor Dower.
So in that case, I just want to comment that I'm actually really surprised that we're seeing that there aren't any unmet needs with regards to general taxis, because from personal experience, you go downtown any night of the week and see the queues at the taxi ranks. and how long people are waiting. So that's just a general observation. So I'd be quite interested to know how the survey was carried out.
Yeah, if you look at the back of the pack, there is the whole, it's an independent survey. They take the main ranks in both Bournemouth and Poole. They put cameras up, but obviously they have to take it over. While they do look at the periods of high uptake or required high uptake, they have to look at it across the whole board. And obviously, you know, we do target the more busier ranks. And there will be a wait. It's not saying there isn't a wait, because obviously if you didn't have any limit, then you could flood the area. So say like on a Saturday, the whole of the centre of Bournemouth could be busy, but anybody in an outer lying area in Poole or Christchurch or on Wimborne Road in Winton, they might not be able to get them because they're all, you know, where the people are at, so to speak. It's another one of these balancing acts between, you know, where the people are and you know, what time of day it is. So it is quite complicated, and some as I say, I know it is monitored, and the report does show where the cameras were and what they noticed while they were on there.
Thank you. The reasons for the recommendation, paragraph 2, the last unmet needs survey took place in 2020, and the guidance recommends that in order to maintain a quantity restriction, the unmet needs must be reviewed every 3 years. Where there is unmet need, the restriction would need to be removed. Where there is no unmet need, the restriction can remain unchanged, be amended or removed, and that's what's before us this morning. Sophie, please.
Thank you, Chair. Within Appendix 1, the unmet needs survey itself, so pages 3 and 5 do detail the locations of the ranks that were assessed. They were assessed in July of 22 and October of 22, so obviously there will be a disparity on seasonal influx, for example, so capturing our busiest time from a visitor's perspective in July 22, but also then in October 22. So I draw attention to pages 3 and 5 that show the ranks that were assessed.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Chapman-Law.
Yeah, one thing I didn't quite see didn't notice in the report when I was reading it is that there is talk of sort of number of taxis versus number of drivers, and the feedback from the company seems to be a lack of drivers rather than a lack of cars. What is the ratio between drivers to cars that we have registered? Do we know?
There are approximately 900 plus vehicles. That's both Hackney and private hire. That includes, you know, cars that do airport runs, etc. And there are about 1,200 drivers. So there is a slight down in the drivers, because obviously a vehicle can work 24/7, but obviously it wouldn't be the same driver in one vehicle.
Councillor Matthews.
Thank you, Chair. Just for clarification, I've just read through the survey that takes place. Is that the kind of standard methodology that's used throughout the country for assessing unmet need?
There is only one company.
There is only, yeah, that's fine. On that basis, I just wanted to double check that. I mean, essentially, the unmet need, you've demonstrated that there is no unmet need through this survey, which is the standard criteria. Can I move that we go for the recommendation in that case? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Matthews. We hadn't actually got to the debate point.
Oh, right.
We were asking questions.
Sorry.
So
I was preempting it. Sorry,
it's okay. So do you have any further questions, first of all, for members? Councillor Hilliard.
Thank you, Chair. It was just about the number of 15 licences per year. Are they all taken up, please?
No. This is where, because they are wheelchair accessible, and obviously this policy sort of came in mid-COVID, we've only actually had 3. hence why the previous item about wheelchair accessible was kind of quite important, because we're hoping to encourage people to take them up and give them all the make it as attractive as we can.
Thanks for that. And obviously, the report says there's no unmet need. Is that because we're finding there's other sources for residents, like either they like to pre-book or they have Uber, or what do you think is one of the reasons that you're not needing more licenses and there's still no unmet need?
Well, obviously, unless you're in the centre of a town, you find nowadays, you know, in years gone by, you would say, oh, if you want a taxi, you've got nearest rank is down there. Now you just get your phone out, either ring them, look on an app, or what have you. So there is a slight change of operation in that context.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you. Councillor Farquhar.
It's an interesting point, and particularly on the wheelchair accessible vehicles, because on page 45, table 5, is that we talk about the intention is to increase wheelchair accessible vehicles. But if you look at 2020 on that table for our Hackney carriages, it drops from 80 in 2019 to 47, and then 47 in 21, then picks up to 63. But not unsurprisingly, on the private hire vehicles, which is 4 columns along, is that it drops from 34 to 14 to 14 to 9 to 8 in this year. My question really relates to the concern that we're not taking up those Hackney plates. It doesn't correspond to these figures for wheelchair accessible vehicles. So my question is, what happens to a plate once the vehicle either gets trashed, or the driver decides that, or the operator gets rid, or the driver decides that it's not for them? What actually happens to that plate? And are we getting a skew on the figures that we release 15 a year within Bournemouth and Poole, of which only 3 were taken up in this year, I believe it was, or it might well have been last year, because it doesn't seem that our thoughts on actually increasing wheelchair accessible vehicles are being reflected by the trade themselves, because of the figures on table 5. So my question is, what happens to a plate that is a wheelchair accessible vehicle? Should the operator get rid, because perhaps it makes more financial sense to have a smaller vehicle and apply the trade as a private hire vehicle?
Thank you, Councillor.
Right. Private hire vehicles, if they're a wheelchair accessible vehicle, we cannot impose the condition that they have to be wheelchair accessible. So that is the proprietor's choice. So if he has a wheelchair accessible vehicle and wants to move to a saloon vehicle, he can just do that. We don't have the authority to impose that on them. With the Hackney carriages, both in Bournemouth and Poole, there are some Hackney carriages that are non-wheelchair because they've been around for many, many years, and there are some Hackney carriages that are wheelchair, so they have to be replaced with a wheelchair accessible vehicle. Obviously that number is quite small, as you see, 60 from a fleet of approximately 500 Hackneys. With regard to if they give the plate back, well, any plate given back will then go into the pot to be reissued if they choose to. Most of the ones that are saloons will be transferred to somebody else if the guy wants to give up or replace it, or whatever they crash it. They'll just replace it or pass it on, transfer it to somebody else. So I hope that answers your question.
Councillor Farquhar.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Chair. It's just the nature of the market that we can see that we'll go where the money is. But I think as an authority, we have a responsibility to those that have accessibility needs. And it is disappointing, shall we say, that the Hackney plate licence doesn't seem to be that fulfilling that requirement to those that have accessibility needs. But it is what it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Questions of the officers at all? If not, I will open the item up for debate and ask Councillor Matthews if he'd like to begin.
Just really like to reiterate, I wanted to clarify on the methodology that's used. I mean, essentially, I look for evidence. That's what we're supposed to do. And if it's the demonstrative unmet demand through the evidence, through the standardised methodology, notwithstanding some of the comments that have been made about sort of disability access and everything, to absolutely endorse all those points. But my view is I'm very happy to maintain the status quo. So, thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Matthews. So you're proposing as set out
Yes.
on the recommend. Do you have a seconder at all? Thank you, Councillor Fowler. It has been proposed and seconded that as the recommended or the recommendation as set out on the paper. Is there any further debate before I go to the vote? Councillor Chapman-Law.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like our issue is a lack of drivers rather than a lack of cars. You know, looking through some of the comments of what some people are saying, you know, the peak times with school pickups and stuff, they're struggling to get taxis then. But equally, the trade are saying we don't have enough drivers. And certainly the lack of uptake in the extra licenses does appear to reflect that we have enough cars. We just need more drivers.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman-Law. Any further debate? Councillor Fowler.
Yeah, I'd just like to agree with what Councillor Chapman just said. He's absolutely right, but things have changed. And we as consumers have got choices today. I wouldn't recommend some of those choices for me or my family, but lots of other people do use them. And I think we've got to do everything we can to support the trade and to support new drivers coming through and not make it too difficult for them. I completely agree. I've seconded the motion, so I do completely agree with this. But yeah, I think that needs to be recognised. As an authority, we would like things to be different, but there's lots of things that we'd like to be different in life, certainly within the BCP area, and this is one of them. But it could be a generational thing, and it could be what people are used to. I would always use a licensed taxi, but I know an awful lot of younger people who don't. So that's what I'd like to say.
Thank you, Councillor Fowler. If there's no further debate, I'll put it to the vote that to agree the recommendation as set out on the papers. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you, members. Item 8 on this morning's agenda is the forward plan. Can I ask Sophie if she would just introduce the item, please? Okay, so can I appeal to members to maybe put your thinking caps on for future items that we bring to the committee in terms of the, and Linda has very kindly passed the forward plan to me, and it should be on the.
It is.
Yeah, it should be there.
At the very low bottom, one row down. Yeah.
So we're. So the next item on the forward plan is the update on the provisions and positioning of taxi ranks, and that's due to come to us in September. Item 4, review of the pricing mechanism for licensed vehicles, and again that's due in September. And then we have pleasure boat policy. My understanding is that we don't have a pleasure boat policy at the moment, and so that will be a new item which will come to the committee. So look forward to that one. Councillor Filer.
Pleasure boats is obviously all in upwards in our minds at the moment. Is that going to, when you say it's going to be brought before the committee, is it going to be in September or is it at some future date? Chairman, can I suggest that we consider bringing that forward in view of the recent tragedy and all the speculation that's around it?
Thank you, Councillor Filer. Is Councillor Rogers with us still, or did she join this morning?
Sarah Rogers.
Yeah.
I don't think she joined.
No.
No.
Okay. Let's.
Sophie's got.
Sophie.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify from a pleasure boat perspective, the types of vehicles that we do licence. Vessels even, still got a taxi head on, vessels that carry over 50 passengers are not licensed by the local authority, they're licensed by the Maritime Authority. So there are two types of vessels that are licensed by the local authority. The exact detail of those evades me at the moment, but it's not going to be larger vessels that we would be looking to incorporate a policy around. Happy to take recommendations though.
Thank you, Sophie. Yeah, my understanding was it was the smaller craft that are used in the Christchurch and Poole area. Councillor Hilliard.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question: are all our policies aligned now, harmonised across the 3 towns? And similarly, we mentioned there was no pleasure boat policy. Are there any other gaps we got? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, policies are aligned across BCP. The pleasure boat policy is in draft at the moment and will be circulated to the committee in due course. There are no other understood gaps at this time.
Thank you, Sophie. I'll take on board the point made by Councillor Filer, and if we could ask the officers to look at bringing that report forward, it would be appreciated. Councillor Farquhar.
Yes, indeed, Chair. Perhaps because it is the forward plan for the licensing committee, to my understanding as a whole, there's no mention of anything to do with premises licenses or sexual entertainment venues. Perhaps an update for an officer for where we're at following the High Court judgment would be probably wise.
Can we add that to the list, Linda?
We can add it to the list, but we're still in early days with the sex establishment policy. As you're all aware, the High Court quashed the policy that we did have, the BCP policy. So we're in that very early stage of considering what it is the council as a whole want from that policy. So officers are in consultation with senior management and the more senior members, and once there is a steer and we know as a council what you want to achieve from that policy, a draft will be prepared and then it will be brought to the licensing committee. But at the moment we haven't quite got to that stage. So I don't see that policy, if there is even a decision's got to be made, are we going to have a sex establishment policy? We don't legally need one. So that's the first decision that's got to be made by somebody, not an individual officer. It's got to be a council decision or a steer. And then once that decision has been made, the officers will start work on the draft policy, which will come to you. But I can't see anything coming to you, well, certainly this year. We're not going to see anything in September or December. I should imagine it would be more next year. Sophie, would you agree?
Can I just ask, Linda, will that be the responsibility of the portfolio holder and cabinet to decide whether or not the council wishes to have SEV?
Certainly the portfolio holder will be involved, and I understand
that at the moment there is an arrangement for the portfolio holder and for the leader and probably a couple of others just to have a briefing about the whole, to bring them up to speed as well where we are. So we are really in early doors. It's not to, you know, it's not that I'm trying to hide anything, but it's just let's start at the top. What does everyone want before work is done on it? So that will be the first thing that goes on. It will be just a briefing to the portfolio holder, and I think the leader. Were you going to have somebody else there?
Yes, we were going to invite the chair and vice chair to that briefing as well.
Thank you. So I'm envisaging then that we'll have a question go to full council as to whether or not the BCP Council wishes to have a SEB policy before it comes to
Possibly. I really don't. I suppose that's one of the decisions that has to be made, is how we're going to.
Yeah.
I think last time we worked on a policy, we had one in Bournemouth. There wasn't one in Christchurch. I think there was one in Poole, and it was just work to, you know, bring together a BCP policy. So we started already with the decision, we're just expecting we will have a policy. So it sort of started at that level, but we just want to, you know, shall we have a policy? What generally do you want in it? And then we'll work through it.
Thank you, Linda. It just seems that it would be a waste of officers' time to sit down and try and put something together, only go to full council and say, well, we don't actually want some policy.
No,
so
exactly.
I think it should start.
So that's what we're starting at the
yeah.
top. And shall I just the premises license? Let me the statement of licensing policy for premises. That's due to be renewed. Let me just look at the date. Is that 25 as well? I think that could be 25. Here we go. Yeah, the current policy was 20 to 25. So work will have to start on looking at the premises policy, well, the statement of licensing policy. That is a statutory policy. We've got to have one. And that needs to be reviewed for 2025. So I should imagine work will start on that early next year as well.
Thank you, Linda. That's Farquhar.
Thank you very much. That's very useful, Chair. I really appreciate that. One of the issues which is coming up in my ward, and it seems to be a bit of a crossover, is you'll recall that during COVID there was a variety of interventions by the government for pavement licences and the extension of the premises licences for what they could do. Issues which I'm having with my ward relate to that rolling over, as it were, now that the restrictions of COVID have been lifted, is that there are pavements that are getting chairs, tables, marquees, flower boxes, and a variety making an appearance. At the moment, what I'm discovering is that highways are dealing with the pavement license. However, these are premises that are licensed, and if they are causing an obstruction or a public nuisance, then perhaps for the forward plan we need to see to where they need to be, e.g. under licensing as opposed to highways at the moment, because highways are strictly going by, I think it's 1 or 1.2 meters is allowed, even for you have a double bogie bush chair and somebody on a Zimmer frame trying to pass outside a premises that's trying to make the business. So perhaps my question is that licensed premises that are using the pavements for their licensed trade needs to actually be in there, or an update as regards what's happening from government as regards these pavement licenses, because at the moment highways are finding it difficult to enforce, because that's the feedback which I'm getting. So I'm getting residents saying, well, why can't I get past these chairs? And I've gone to who I thought was appropriate, and the answer is coming back from highways for enforcement, and they're saying they can't enforce what they can enforce apart from that. So essentially my question is that there's a rumour that something's happening in autumn of 23 whereby what carried over from COVID to allow business and trade to continue is going back. So I would like to see that on the forward plan if possible.
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar. Are we able to ask the licensing officer just to come back with a report?
Yes, we can put that on the next thing. So certainly
what was allowed by a pavement licence was supposed to stop on the 30th of September 23, but I believe there are some changes. I can't tell you what they exactly are, but we will look that up and we'll bring that back to you in September.
Thank you.
Second, Chair.
Any further discussion at all, members? Councillor Chapman-Law.
Yeah, more taxi stuff. So from the sort of the unmet, going back to the unmet needs survey, there's quite a lot of detail in there, and reading some of the comments that people are leaving on that survey, both in terms from the trade and from users. So driver standards keeps coming up over and over again in that report, and I've experienced it myself quite recently with getting a close pass whilst riding a barrel. Obviously that's been dealt with, and but you know, speeding and being a little bit discourteous in general, our Hackney carriages need to be the best of the best, and they need to be seen as being the best of the best. And wondering if we should consider something to try and improve the driver standards of the perceived driving standards of our Hackney carriages.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman-Law. I'm not sure if we could have a report on that one at all. The thing, I'm guessing that the only action you can take is on members of the public reporting it to the council. That's the thing. So if there's very little reports, much the same as the police, if you don't report a crime, they can't include it within their figures. So if members of the public don't report to the council and make a complaint, then we don't know exactly what's what. So Sophie, please.
Yeah, it's probably worth noting that there have been cases in recent subcommittees where we have had immediate revocations, where we have had substantial complaints. We also do take a really proactive stance and a considerable amount of joint working with the police, where we do receive any complaints regarding drivers and taking them through a warning process, and obviously bringing them through to subcommittee where required as well. So the only thing I could potentially suggest is a report on that basis to look at the number of driver-based complaints that we've had and the actions that have come out of that. But I would stress that it is a very small minority of our drivers. The majority of our drivers are there upholding the standards that we expect them to be, and where we have identified concerns regarding behaviour, we do address them as quickly as we possibly can and in the most robust manner. And that goes from everything from a warning or a discussion of an informal discussion of a concern, all the way through to revocation if that's what's required. But we're open to discussion, and we're open to requirements that the committee would like to see.
Thank you, Sophie. Would members be happy for officers to bring a report on the issues with the personal taxi drivers' licences? Councillor Filer.
In principle, maybe yes, but I think a lot of it is perception. We all of us have complaints. Well, maybe you haven't had any yet, but you will. People will complain about lots of things. Some of them with justification, and some of them because they were in a bad mood that day, or they're just general complainers. And I think it's going to take a lot of officer time to drill down to what, I mean, it might be interesting to have a report perhaps annually or every 6 months on how many complaints there have been, but an actual report, because what one person considers to be a surly, rude driver, someone else will say, thank goodness he left me alone to get on with my on my phone. And I think it's a lot of work, and there won't be much results. I can't see what the result can be unless we're going to mention names, and I think that would be invidious. I take a taxi a lot because I don't drive, and most of the drivers are fabulous, and some of them, I think it depends on me actually whether I'm smiling or not, but some of them can be surly, but no one's ever actually been bad. I think driving standards is to do with driving the car, and I've never felt endangered by them. But it's an interesting point, and if we'd like to know how many complaints there have been, but be wary. A lot of those will be a bit dodgy.
Mrs.
We will have to be reviewing all of the taxi policies quite shortly. Work will have to start on those, and I think once that review is going on, the officers will be looking in detail at all the conditions that are currently on the policies, and if there is anything lacking, and they'll take on board complaints that they may have received. So that will inform the review of the policy, and obviously it will be open to the committee, the different stages, the draft, and at that point it might be better to feed into it there rather than do it as a separate piece of work for this year.
Yeah.
Thank you, Linda. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not so. I am fussed about the complaints, but I prefer prevention rather than cure. So you know, in days gone by, we've seen, or still do see, like how's my driving numbers on the backs of vans and that sort of thing. You know, I'm more about encouraging good behaviour rather than, you know, I want to see the bad behaviour punished and dealt with, but I'd rather encourage our drivers to be better drivers and better people in general. So yeah, I don't want to make that clear. It's more about encouraging good behaviour rather than punishing bad behaviour, and I think we should have a look at means of doing that.
I'm sure that it's all set out in the policy, Councillor Chapman. Or Councillor Farquhar first.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, just on Councillor Chapman Law's point, I mean, that's a very good suggestion, because we've raised it here before, is that sometimes it's difficult to understand through our websites, etc., how you make a complaint against a taxi driver for whatever reason, which could include perception of a close pass or, you know, any other driving behaviour. Professional drivers generally expect to have their number on the back, because it is a proactive way to discipline. I know that we can't CCTV, shall I say, the cameras within the vehicles because of the restrictions of the law. However, as I've discussed before in this forum, is that having a camera inside your vehicle actually, for myself personally, means that I temper my driving and my reactions a lot more. Perhaps a vehicle where you had a number on the back, a free phone number or whatever, that goes through to the licensing authority, that somebody could say, such and such a vehicle registration on such and such a date didn't give way at the zebra crossing, may actually address and catch early on behaviours which may lead to an incident which gets reported at a later date. So I would support exploring that particular suggestion, perhaps as part of the policy review, and certainly speaking to the trade, because professional drivers can expect to have a number on the back to ensure that they maintain the highest professional standards. My own particular point was that I was at a community meeting where reporting, and a lot of subject matter that came up repeatedly was theft from supermarkets, licensed supermarkets of a variety, I won't name them, but of a variety sort of high street sort of size. And the fact that their staff are instructed that they're not to interfere with people stealing from the premises. Likewise, their security staff, anecdotally, have been told not to interfere either. There is within my ward, there are supermarkets that are removing their security staff because essentially, why pay for somebody who can't actually take action to prevent theft from the stores? My question is, or perhaps a discussion, a debate for this particular forum, is that all licensed premises have a responsibility to ensure public safety and the prevention of crime and disorder. If they're not doing that and individuals are coming in and literally helping themselves to meat, wine, spirits and walking out unchallenged, that breaks what public safety, because a member of the public wanted to actually say, hey, that's not right. Or the crime itself has been committed and nobody else can actually take any action. Then perhaps where my thought process is that to encourage the supermarkets to push back against this low-level crime, because it is theft sometimes to order, is that we have a role here in the licensing committee to review the licensing of those premises, to uphold the licensing objectives, including the prevention of crime and disorder. And if they don't have the mechanism or the support at their elbow to enforce the prevention of crime and disorder, then perhaps this licensing committee has a role to actually play, to actually review their licenses, to actually prevent crime and disorder and a danger to the safety of the public. So I think perhaps it's a forum that maybe should go on, because at the wider national picture, there seems to be, both from the police and from the wider government, that this crime goes on unchallenged, but it's happening on premises licenses which have a responsibility to uphold the licensing principles.
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar. Are we, Sophie?
Thank you, Chair. There are quite a number of developments that are happening at the moment outside of licensing, but within the wider Safer Communities remit, around crime reduction partnerships, working with local businesses and also business improvement districts. We also do a number of things like days of action, which are multi-agency, and where we do have identified hotspot locations for crime and disorder under our partnership coordination group, which sits underneath the Community Safety Partnership. Those premises will be worked on as a multi-agency as well. So there is a process to follow from an operational perspective. And if there are still continued concerns on that basis, then obviously there is the process to go through licensing subcommittee. You know, if all other avenues do not work, but there is a lot of development work in order to support the shops. Around information sharing about prolific offenders, to make sure that they are adhering to things like banning orders, to make sure that we are taking enforcement action through the antisocial behaviour route where possible. So there's some progressive work around that at the moment, which I'd be happy to report back to the committee on exactly what that is and how that feeds into the wider premises licensing and sort of licence reviews, if members would be interested.
Thank you, Sophie. I'm sure that members would be delighted to receive that information.
I'd appreciate that, Chair. Could we actually put a date on that? The simple reason is that there's a lot of chatter on social media and the newspapers, etc., that this is criminal behaviour which is causing alarm and distress to members of the public. It's costing the businesses money, and it's fine to say we're progressing, etc., to help antisocial behaviour. My specific point was, if you're letting go your door staff to prevent crime and door staff are not allowed to challenge, then perhaps the premises review needs to come before the work which is happening from the Community Safety Partnership, because the problem is now continuous on a daily basis in small supermarkets in everybody's ward.
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar. Well, I think our scheduled meeting is for the 14th of September, but Mrs. Cole,
Yeah,
please.
I just need to make the point. There is this wider work going on with general antisocial behaviour, but this is the licensing committee, and when we talk about premises licence, we are quite restricted. We can only call a premises in for a review if they're undermining a licensing objective. And as Councillor Farquhar said, crime and disorder is one of those things. But you actually only need a licence if you want to sell alcohol. All of those corner shops do not need a premises licence if they want to sell meat, for example. So it would be very difficult for anybody to call a licence for a review if somebody is stealing meat. There has to be that we have to base it on a licensing objective, and so I just don't want to get your hopes up, Councillor Farquhar. There is wider stuff going on in the community, the ASB team. Sophie's
Secretary Chair, I think I was fairly clear that it's premises licenses that I'm talking about. It is licenses that are premises that have an alcohol license to sell alcohol. It's not necessarily that alcohol is the thing which has been stolen over and over again. The point is that they have a responsibility where alcohol is stolen to actually prevent that crime and disorder. And if what they've been told is that they lay off your security staff, then all that happens is that the individuals that are stealing to order, whether it be meat on occasion or more often alcohol to sell on, is that they just walk in because there's nothing to restrict them. And this is an issue which is happening now, today, and it is causing a great degree of concern to the public. My emphasis here was to help those businesses, because if those head offices are not responding appropriately to the small business which is losing alcohol or sales of meat, etc., because their security staff are restricted to intercepting, because they're not restricted to intercept crime and disorder in a pub or premises licensed elsewhere, because crime and disorder is happening due to the fact there's alcohol being stolen from those locations. So I'm quite happy to wait till September, but I think there is something we can do as a licensing authority to identify that there is crime and disorder happening around licensed premises. Just because they have a supermarket name and a head office, etc., shouldn't be any reason why, if it's happening daily and it's not getting reported into the licensing authority or into the safety partnership, then one of us can call it in as a review and force the issue to say, what are you doing to prevent crime and disorder at your licensed premises, no matter what supermarket brand is above the door? So that's my point here, is that it's becoming a big issue, that it's a daily basis that crime and disorder is happening around premises licenses. And I do believe that the licensing authority has tools for reviewing the license that it can bring into play, which will make a bigger noise about the people that are actually committing the crime, actually exploiting those locations. Smaller supermarkets, absolutely, that don't have alcohol, then that's not our issue. That's nothing within our power. But I do believe as a licensing committee, we have an opportunity here to actually ring the warning bell to larger premises supermarkets.
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar. Can I ask Sophie if you could make a note of Councillor Farquhar's requirement, and whether you'd be able to bring a report back to the committee for September?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we'll make a note of the concerns and prepare something ready for committee in September.
Thank you very much. Any other points, members? Councillor Chapman-Law?
Yeah, just to echo George, really, I've seen numerous reports on social media of people just walking out of shops with alcohol and going unchallenged, and actually members of the public have challenged them and been injured in the process. Yeah, it's if shops are just letting them walk out, then that's not preventing crime and disorder.
So hopefully we will have a report in September. Right, any further debate? No, in which case then, members, I will declare the meeting closed at